in every community a group of angelic troublemakers.
Social justice, power word, power word, power word. Social justice, power word, power word, power word.
Good evening to our friends on the East Coast. Good afternoon to our friends in the West, and good in-between time to our friends in the in-between spaces. Welcome, 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 welcome to the Social Justice Power Hour. Welcome to the virtual headquarters of the Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice. My name is Robert Seda-Schreiber. I'm the chief activist here at the center and your host for this evening, as I have been for this past year. We've been coming at you live every single weeknight since the pandemic started. Over 300 some odd shows, many of them very odd indeed. So thank you for joining us in virtual community tonight. Our guest tonight, I am so over the moon. David F. Walker, I am a huge fan. His work is so important and so entertaining and empowering all at once. I have been chasing after him for a good while to be on the Power Hour, poking at him on the Twitter machine, giving a little nudge on the Insta, and finally we got him to be on the show tonight, and you're going to enjoy this conversation. I know that a lot of you are tuning in to see David and know his work, love his work, fans of his work, so thank you for joining us. I hope that you'll come back again to the Power Hour, and those of you that join us regularly and maybe not so familiar with David's work, you're in for a treat tonight, my friends. But those of you who are here for the first time, and I do invite you back, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, here are some of the things that are coming up on the Power Hour so I can entice you to come back, my friends. Tomorrow night, as always, every Tuesday night, we have free and fabulous queer yoga for our LGBTQI community. Allies, friends, and family all welcome. Our queer yoga master, Jasmani, brings us to virtual nirvana. And then coming up on Wednesday, great conversation with Brian J. Jones, the biographer of Washington Irving, George Lucas, and Jim Henson, and this guy here, Dr. Seuss Theodore Geisel. All the controversy and conversation around his work. No one better than Brian to come and break it down for us. We're looking forward to that. Thursday night, Steve Brodner, master illustrator, coming at us with his Greater Quiet series that he's been doing in the nation since the pandemic started as well. Every weekday, he's been drawing a new piece for the Greater Quiet. He comes to us once a month and shares that work. Great encapsulation of what's been going on. And Friday night, very excited about this. Kalisa Ray, poet, coming and doing a recital for us, Ghost in a Black Girl's Throat. Going to be really special. Please tune in for that Friday night. And then coming up later on in the Power Hour, we have Rebecca Carroll with Surviving the White Gaze, powerful book. Giselle Fetterman, the second lady of Pennsylvania, coming at us, incredible fundraiser and nonprofit organizer in her own right. Can't wait to have this conversation with her. Let the Lord sort them out. The rise and the fall of the death penalty. Maurice Chammah is a wonderful reporter with the Marshall Project. Can't wait to talk about the disparity in our criminal justice system. Changing the Game is an incredible documentary about transgender athletes in sports. We'll have one of the folks behind it, Shane Diamond, on the eve of its release on Hulu, so join us for that. David Camp, wonderful author and journalist. Sunny Days, the children's television revolution that changed America, will be here on the eve of his paperback release, and he's bringing some special guests with him. Bernadette Yao from Zoom, and Emilio Delgado Luis from Sesame Street. That's going to be a lot of fun, folks, and very meaningful as well. And finally, Brian Broom. This book, Punch Me Up to the Gods. This book is going to blow up, and we cannot wait to have Brian with us and break it down for us. And finally, save the date. Put a rainbow heart on your calendar. June 12th, Virtual Pride 21 coming at you. If you were here for Virtual Pride last year, we had over 10,000 folks join us in virtual community. This year, it's going to be bigger, badder, and better than ever, more fabulous, more meaningful, boots in the ground, high heel shoes on the dance floor. We have Billy Porter confirmed. We have a whole bunch of folks coming at you. Wesley Stace, John Doe from X. Our co-hosts are going to be Jill Sobule, Mike Hotpence, Harmonica Sunbeam, and Maurice Carlos Ruffin. It's going to be quite the event, so don't miss it. That's June 12th. Make sure you show up that night for an incredible Pride event. But tonight, oh my gosh, give me a second to catch my breath. David F. Walker is an award-worthy. Look, I'm so excited I can't even speak. My mouth is like so excited. My tongue is twitching like David's was a few weeks back. David F. Walker is an award-winning comics writer, book author, filmmaker, journalist, educator, in short, the baddest Renaissance man alive. David's work in comics include Bitterroot, Shaft, Naomi, Powerman and Iron Fist, Nighthawk, Fury, Cyborg, and oh so many other fantastic projects. He wrote the novel Shaft's Revenge, the first new novel starring the titular private detective in nearly 40 years, folks, and is also the creator of the critically acclaimed YA series, The Adventures of Darius Logan. Recognized as a leading scholar expert on African-American cinema, David has been interviewed in print, online, and on the TV machine by such outlets as the LA Times, New York Daily News, BBC, AMC, VH1, and too many other acronyms to list. And also produced one of the definitive documentaries on the topic of blaxploitation films, Macked, Hammered, Slaughtered, and Shafted. His publication, Badass Mofo, became internationally known as the indispensable resource guide to black films of the 70s, and he is co-author of the equally essential book, Reflections on Blaxploitation, Actors and Directors Speak. David's more recent book was the more reflective Becoming Black, Personal Ramblings on Racial Identification, Racism, and Popular Culture. As David his own self says, quote, "It all comes back to representation and feeling a sense of belonging. Growing up as a kid, all my favorite superheroes, all my favorite comic books, the vast majority of them were white guys. And it's not to say there's anything wrong with that, but then you have to look at what the other side of that equation is. What is that you're getting? And if you're a black person or a person of color or a woman, what are the representations that you're seeing? And are they all problematic if they exist at all? And I just feel like I don't want other young people to go through what I went through when I was young. Now I'm an old man, and I'd just like to see things change a little bit. And David indeed is that change maker we all need, and that possibility model for so many kids and adults reading comics today. And that is why we are so thrilled to have him tonight at our Barry Russin Center for Social Justice virtual headquarters. So please join me in welcoming to the Power Hour, David F. Walker, folks. David, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Hey, thank you for having me. That introduction was like overwhelming. I'm like, who are you talking about? That can't be me. It's amazing how accomplished any single person can sound if you just word it just right. So,
no, stop. I'm going to stop you. I'm going to interrupt you for the only time this evening. You, my friend, have shown light in so many corners of so many different places of our popular culture and allowed not only black folks, people of color, women, queer folks, and all the marginalized communities to see themselves in some way, but you've lit it up in a way that you've inspired so many others, including the artists you work with in comics. So often, the comics I read that are yours, the artists that are working with you are doing some of their best work. So there's something to be said for that too.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. My therapist says I need to get better at owning both my greatness and my shortcomings. I hoard my shortcomings. You know, I can't let go of those. But and any sort of accomplishments I have, I feel like yeah, whatever. Just let's move on to the next thing. Who's the guest you're having tomorrow? That was as you were prattling off or I shouldn't say prattling because that has a negative connotation. As you were listing the upcoming episodes, every single one, I was like, oh, yeah, I'm glad I'm not following them, So it's
No. As one anxious with a capital A boy to another with their, talking to a therapist. I understand that, but gosh, I hope that maybe tonight we'll have a major breakthrough. Maybe by talking about your work tonight, we can bring you there, my friend, because you deserve it.
Well, thank
really,
you.
As I said at the outset, I've been chasing after you for a while. You know that. I've been bugging the heck out of you, and I don't do that for many folks.
No, and it's funny because I'm always assuming that if anyone wants to talk to me, that they've somehow mistaken me for somebody else. Whether it's there's a David Walker who I think the thing that he's most well known for is he wrote like the liner notes for a DVD release like 20 years ago. And so I'm always like, no, it must be that David Walker you want to, or there's a jazz musician from the 70s. I'm always convinced it's somebody else, which, says it gives you tremendous insight into how I see myself and for better or for worse.
Well, I think on your side of things for worse, because I wish that you would understand the impact. And I want to go big first and talk about this concept of you really, and I don't bandy about words and I don't ever, blow smoke. You are really a possibility model, and you are that outlet, that piece that you were looking for as a kid for so many kids now. I hope you see that. I hope you recognize that, at least, that you have accomplished that thing that you were missing when you needed it the most in your youth.
It's interesting that you say that, because there's part of me that does recognize that, but I feel as if it's almost like a really small piece. I was talking to a friend the other day, an artist, and they asked me, well, what are some of the projects you want to do in the future? And I had said, I don't have necessarily specific projects in mind per se, but I have specific people that I'd like to see, specific scenarios that I'd like to see. And by that, I really find myself looking at both film and television and comics and saying, okay, what am I not seeing? What am I as a middle-aged, man who, who still feels marginalized to a certain extent, but let's be honest, when we're as men, I can only be marginalized so much compared to so many other folks, right? And I've sort of become obsessed with, and obsessed might not be the right word, but definitely interested in the characters that I'm not seeing. And by that, I mean, I can look at a film like, say, Black Panther, which was never something I thought I would see when I was a kid, right? And I watch a movie like Black Panther, or I'll watch a show like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and I'm like, oh, wow, okay, there's this. I never thought I would see this. But where's my Black trans woman who can beat anybody's ass, with like a 2x4? Where is the whether it's the differently abled person who, is in a wheelchair or whatever, like, where's that? Like, I'm moving into that realm of like, it's for me personally, it's not enough to see representations that I identify with. I want to see representations that allow me to identify with people that I may have never met in my life or exist outside of my social circles, if that makes sense.
Of course.
That makes sense.
So I guess my question to you is that's such an incredible lens to see through, and it's so rare. So few people really have that, especially folks who have a platform to do something about that. So I thank you on behalf of so many of the communities that we represent here at the center and the folks that are watching tonight. But let me ask you this, and this takes some self-reflection. Were you always aware of that? Were you always aware of those lacking identities, those things that weren't seen? Were you able to, was it an evolution, I guess is the question. Said, as a Black man, I don't see myself in comics as a youth, right?
Yeah.
And as you came up and started to work in these various fields, how much of a learning curve was it, and how much of an evolution was it for you to start seeing all these other communities and all these other folks that weren't being seen either?
Oh, it's always been an eye-opening learning curve, like the dead man's curve experience. I mean, there's it and it's interesting because I think part of it is I read something on the other day. Someone on social media said something about they were lamenting the good old days when there was just men and women, that there was just those gender binaries, right? And there was no whatever identifiers that people are using, right? And I was thinking to myself as I read that, I was like, well, yeah, I'm from that era. I'm from that generation when there was just men were men and women were women, and like I don't miss that. The thing that I miss the most is that I have trouble keeping up, right? So I remember when it was just like LGB, and then I remember when it was LGBT, and then it was LGBTQ, and I feel like every day I'm 10 steps behind, and there's things that I don't get, and there's things that I don't understand. I teach part-time, and right now, because of the pandemic, we're on Zoom. And so all of my students most of them have their preferred pronouns, right? And I still, struggle to get it right. And the first day of class, I tell my students, I'm going to mess this up. I really am, because I've got 40 plus years of thinking in the specific pathways, right? But once something is presented to you, or once something is presented to me, it's like I can't unsee it. And it's not like I'm looking for it, but I'll give you an example. I wrote several years ago, I wrote a graphic novel about the life of Frederick Douglass. And during my research phase, I became really obsessed, amongst other things, with Frederick Douglass's wife, who there's virtually nothing written about her. And so I started trying to do as much research about her as I could. And then in the process, doing more and more research about women of that particular time period, mid to late 19th century, U.S. history, and both the abolition movement and then the suffrage movement, right? And at some point, I'm realizing, wow, the history of women in this country may actually be more poorly recorded than the history of African Americans in this country. And if you're a Black woman, it's even worse, right? And suddenly that eye-opening realization of like, okay, well, history has not done it's just due in terms of recording these accomplishments. But what about pop culture? What's pop culture doing? And then I start looking at that, and then I start realizing what's not there, or what I'm not seeing, or okay, so if I'm not finding it on Netflix, do I have to go over to Hulu? Where is what I'm looking for? And it's this. I don't think it's possible to be 100% aware of all the things that you're not seeing. But once you're not seeing them, then you have to ask yourself why. And if it's if you're not seeing, if I'm not seeing what I feel are adequate representations of for lack of, just to keep it in the most simple terms, of Black men. Boom, we'll just say Black men. That's very generalized, right? But if I'm not seeing accurate or representations that I can relate to, I have to ask myself why. And then it's like, well, it's not so much why as it's what am I going to do about it, right? And so my career, I told somebody recently, like my entire career has been built out of spite. I did things because I was an angry kid who felt alienated and felt excluded. And that level of alienation and exclusion does not stop at my doorstep, right? It's if I, who led a difficult life yet a privileged life, if there's stuff missing from what I'm seeing, then there's always going to be someone who's missing more. What can I do to help them realize their possibility, or not even their possibility, but just to see a reflection of themselves as full human beings. And again, it's an evolutionary process, and it's some of it comes from the students that I work with, because I teach at Portland State University. So I'm working with a lot of younger people, a lot of millennials, and half the time I don't know what they're talking about, so it's like just trying to keep up, but also realizing that the world in and of itself it's not as black and white as it used to be. And the problem, as I see it in this country especially, is that we're trying to hold on to these black and white, either or, us or them, like these very strict ways of seeing things. And there's so much more complexity to that. And that complexity is terrifying and can be intimidating, but it's also like amazing. I mean, it's a friend of mine, their daughter is like 14 or 15, and she recently came out, and I was like, man, when we were 14 or 15, that never happened. Like, I went to high school in the 80s, and it was like, no, there was no, it was not an option. Right. And while I didn't think about it then, I think about it now, and I think about, like, okay, how many of the kids I went to high school with had the same issues, but nobody to talk to. It wasn't acceptable conversation to have. There was no, there was no same sex, prom dates. No way at all, and while some people, especially people my age, will see that as, a minor thing or not that important, I can't get down with that thinking. It's if it's important to somebody, then it's important, right?
But so there's the question. There's the larger question I want to get to is, how did you come to that? Is that something that is inherent in who you are, or was there some sort of realization or even epiphany? And it's rare that you have that realization that I'm having an epiphany now. But, with you and the multiple platforms that you have been able to express yourself and your ideas and to communicate things, where was it that you said, okay, I have a voice, I want to use it to amplify others? And was it whilst you were doing that, or was it before that you knew, okay, I want to do my yeoman's work and do what I need to do to get this place where I can finally speak for others, or we don't speak for others, but to allow others to speak for themselves?
Mm-hmm. It's definitely been an evolutionary process, and I said earlier that a lot of what I've done has been out of spite, and it really was. It wasn't until I got much older that I heard the term alienated or alienation and understood what it meant. But like, that's what I felt most of my life, and I remember the first day of really being made to feel like I didn't belong somewhere was my very first day of kindergarten. And so that feeling of not being, part of the accepted group or not belonging, alienation, whatever you want to call it, it goes back pretty far, it goes back 40 something years of my life. And of course, kindergarten's right, you're at an age, you're like 5 years old, you're starting to be more aware of television and film and comics, whatever. I was always a curious kid. And I have always gone back to that feeling of, what it felt like to not belong or to be made to feel like you don't belong, because who's to say I belonged or not, right? That's really, ultimately, that becomes my decision. Do I assert my place in a space, and do I want to be in that space, right? Now, throughout my life, there's been different people that I've met who, in one way or another, maybe it's something they said or maybe it's something they did that it made me change my thinking, or maybe it's something that I didn't even think about in general. I mean, if we go back to just talking about, when I was a kid growing up, then this is, not that long ago, but it was, in the 80s, there was the argument over, if you're queer, is it a choice or are you born that way? Right. Like those words coming out of my mouth kind of make me sick to my stomach. Right. But I realized that I didn't know this. Right. We were still talking about this in high school. And it was like, well, why would anyone be gay? Come on, that's gay. Why would you be gay? And I remember, in college, so it was, a couple of years after high school, I was going to art school, and somebody said to me, I can't remember how it came up in the conversation, but I'll never forget. It was, he lived in my building. Was going to School of Visual Arts in New York City. His name was Jamie. And Jamie said something about, how he'd always, been attracted to boys ever since he was a little boy, and he'd never kissed a girl, and he didn't go to his prom because he couldn't go to prom with another guy. And I was like, really? And he was like, yeah, you didn't know that? And this conversation happened in the 80s. And in that moment, I was like, oh, everything I thought I knew, I don't know. And I guess there's a lot to learn, and I need to think differently. And so that's just kind of how I've been wired. I'll never forget. I was doing volunteer work years ago at a summer camp for kids with muscular dystrophy. So the vast majority of the kids I was working with, were in wheelchairs. And one of them said something to me about, like how I was the weird one because I moved around on two legs. And in his world, everyone he knew was in a chair with wheels, right? And it was that perspective. This was probably 10, 15 years ago. I had this conversation, and that perspective was like, oh, wait a sec. Okay. The way I move through the world, the way I see the world, the way I interpret other people isn't necessarily the way it is. It's just my lens. Right. And if I'm going to accept other people as being human beings, I have to understand that their perceptions of themselves are not the same as my perception of them. And at the very least, I should try to meet them somewhere along the way. And where that came from, I'm going to have to give that to my grandmother probably more than anybody else. I mean, my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, and my mom, probably the two most accepting people I've ever known in my life. And, and it was just, there was never anything that was, how do I put this? When I was a kid growing up, there was never anything that was like weird or gross, or that you stared at somebody because they looked different, or if you saw two men kissing, like there was never and if I said anything or pointed anything out or had a question, it was always explained to me in a way that was really, I guess, with a certain amount of compassion involved. Right. So, and I remember it was really interesting. I was just talking to my cousin about this recently. Our uncle Mark, who passed away, we were about 6 years old when he died of leukemia. But so this would have been in the early 70s. And our Uncle Mark was, I remember going to visit him in New York City, where he lived with another man, and they slept in the same room and in the same bed, right? And nobody said anything about this. This was just normal. This was, Uncle Mark and his friend, Scott. And it wasn't until years later that I realized, oh, wait a sec, Uncle Mark was, in a relationship with another man. And it was like so normalized to me. But then that got me to thinking about like the story of my Uncle Mark. And, here's a guy who's living with another man, and this is 1973 or 4. It's not like now, it's a completely different time. But it was like, I wish I'd known my uncle better before he died. I wish I wish afterwards I got to know his partner at the time so that I could learn stories about him. And it's like anything that keeps us from knowing other human beings as human beings, as opposed to, caricatures or stereotypes, it just keeps us from our own humanity. And again, I don't know where that came from. I don't know where that philosophy came from. Maybe I was abducted by extraterrestrials and they implanted a chip in my head or something. But I'm endlessly fascinated with especially with people that don't seem like they belong, and it's like, because that's how I was, that's how I was made to feel, not within my family, definitely, but within the larger world. And so my heart and imagination is always going to be captured by people who, mainstream society, and we know who mainstream society largely is, but it's also, God, there's people out there who you would think are part of the marginalized groups, and they've still been brainwashed by the dominant paradigm.
It's so interesting to me, because usually when folks are marginalized, like you're speaking of, like the way you felt in kindergarten, it causes them to become more insular. Mm-hmm. It seems to have caused you to become more accepting and open to all communities, and that's I think the switch that makes your work and your presence in all these different communities so important. And that's why I'm glad we're having this conversation, is because there's that switch that at some point, whether it was extraterrestrials or, your mom and your grandmother, or, and all these other factors that led to it, your exposure to your Uncle Mark, and even, not knowing, but, probably having some, subconscious idea, all these different things lead us to becoming our full selves. And then hopefully, if we're human beings, because this is just about being human beings, being understanding enough to see that our experiences, especially the difficult ones, are being shared by so many other folks.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I do think, one thing that's crucial, or maybe it's not crucial, I don't know, but with my upbringing is that, my mom's white, my dad was black, I'm biracial, which was not a term that existed when I was a kid growing up. And so I always felt like I was forced into making a decision of who I am and what I am, but I had no choice in that decision. It was put upon me, right? But at the same time, I wasn't fully accepted by either group, right? Within my family, I was, but as a kid growing up, I was too white for the black kids, too black for the black or too white for the black kids, too black for the white kids, not really fitting in. And so I spent most of my life never fully within, we could call it my own tribe or my own community. There wasn't much of one. And by the time I did find people that I related to, and this was primarily in high school, they were just the super freaks and weirdos, right? They were the ones who for their own reasons didn't fit in. And it's like, if somebody accepts you and you've spent your whole life feeling not accepted, if somebody accepts you, you shouldn't be questioning, either what religion they are or who they're, turned on by or how they identify. You should just be thankful that, like, okay, yeah, I found another freak, another weirdo who doesn't fit in, and we're just going to roll. We're just going to, let's just have a good time. And so I sometimes think that's it, is that feeling of not belonging was so all encompassing as a kid that, and always feeling like I was on the outside looking in, that it was much easier for me to move around and to, what is this person doing over here? What are they all about? Okay, yeah, nope, I'm not interested in that over there. But wait a sec, this is, I remember as a kid growing up, every year the holidays roll around and you're celebrating Christmas. And as much as I liked Christmas, like it was everywhere. You know, it was ubiquitous. There was the Christmas specials, and there was always Christmas music. I was that kid who was just like endlessly fascinated with Hanukkah, because there, you know, Hanukkah was like this thing that we weren't supposed to know about, and because we weren't supposed to know about it, I wanted to know more. And you know, it's odd to say that I was that kid growing up who desperately wanted to celebrate Hanukkah because it wasn't there. And it seemed to me like in my own mind, I equated it with being like some sort of outsider holiday, some sort of holiday for people who didn't quite fit in, because it's like, oh, there's only 2 families in our entire elementary school who celebrate Hanukkah. They must know what it feels like to not quite belong, because we're singing Christmas carols all the time and there's Santa Claus everywhere. Again, how I came to think this way or feel this way, it's, maybe I'm just an old soul trapped in a middle-aged body or something. I don't know.
Well, to me, it seems like, if I may, and going back to that, what we talked about at the outset about, having that breakthrough for you tonight, let's take a stab at it. All these things you weren't seeing that represented you. You weren't seeing these things. You weren't going to the movies and seeing yourself. You weren't reading a comic and seeing yourself. And that absence for you caused you to look for that absence for others.
Yeah, I think that, I think that that's fairly accurate. And it's, I just come back to, I remember how crappy it felt. I remember how crappy it felt. I always tell this story when I was 10 years old, going to see Superman the movie with Christopher Reeve, and just being excited to see a superhero movie, which, back in those days were literally non-existent. I believe Superman was the only superhero movie of the 70s that was, based on a comic book. Just being so excited to see that, and then you get to the scene where they introduce the first black character that you see, and that black character is a pimp, and he's played for laughs. And, and I think it was also the fact that I recognized that Metropolis in the movie was actually just New York City. And so all these things, and I just remember being pulled out of that moment, right? And just this supreme disappointment of, oh, this isn't for me, right? Like suddenly it felt like Superman wasn't for me. And at 10 years old, like I just got pissed off. Like I was the angriest 10-year-old, and I come back to that feeling nearly every day. And I think, yeah, I don't ever want anyone feeling that again. Right. And so much of the work that I do really is, in a lot of ways, is for that 10-year-old kid. And you can, it's not just that 10-year-old black kid, or that 10-year-old biracial kid, or that 10-year-old fat kid, or that 10-year-old queer kid, or that 10-year-old, non-binary, gender fluid, differently abled kid. It's for every single kid. Every single kid deserves to see not only themselves in some capacity, but every kid really needs to understand that they are, how do I put this? That there are others that aren't like them. And that's what makes the world special. It's like there's going to be nothing more boring than if I like these white supremacists who want America to be a white Christian country. It's like, I feel sorry for them on a whole lot of levels, but in part because they truly don't understand how boring and unexceptional they are, and now I'm not saying that every person is a bad person. I'm not going to go there, but I will say that, like, if you were to take all of the things that so many of these white supremacists hate, and if you were to remove their influences from their day-to-day life, from the clothes they wear, to the music they listen to the food they eat, they would have nothing, right? They would have nothing. And because there's not a single group on this planet that is not influenced by other groups in some capacity, whether it's ethnicity, religion, race, gender, sexuality, all of these things, right? All these labels that I can have of 1,000 different labels, right? I mean, when I was a kid growing up, we weren't even African Americans yet, right? At best we were Afro Americans, but we were still colored, or we were still Negro. There things have changed so much in terms of the labels, but I'm still me. Bottom line, I'm still a human being. You're still a human being. Everyone who's watching this, listening to this, they're human beings. And those labels are just, sometimes they're convenient markers, and sometimes they're like, what the hell's that book? The Scarlet Letter, right? There are these things that are made to make us feel like we don't belong, or there's something wrong with us. And I just, it's difficult. Somebody asked me, I did an interview like 2 weeks ago, and they said, what's it like to be a Black comic book writer? I was like, I don't know. It's like, I'm just a writer. I'm like, I can't tell you. It's interesting because I was thinking about this recently. I was thinking this specifically about, like, I guess for lack of a better term, gender identity. And I was arguing with somebody about this, and I said, what does it feel like to be a man? Right? Okay. I can't tell you what it feels like to be a man. I can tell you what it feels like to be me. So who am I to say, if somebody says, yeah, I feel like I'm a woman trapped inside a man's body, or I'm a man trapped inside who am I to say that they are or they aren't? Because I can't even tell you for me, there's no set guidelines for what I think I'm supposed to be, or what others are supposed to be. Like, I can't get down with that programming. So it's just, again, it's interesting to me because it's anything that keeps us apart, and keeps us separated is not a good thing. It's anything that anytime we deny another their humanity, we're giving up a bit of our humanity to do that. And I just, like, I want to be a full person, and I feel like I'm rambling. So sorry.
No, not at all. It's wonderful to hear, because it's so incredibly honest, but there's a passion to it, and there's a centering to it. And the story you told about Superman, I had a tear. Because honestly, there's so much of that I, as a cisgender white guy, mm-hmm. I don't remember that at all. But the moment you tell me that, all of a sudden it becomes so crystal how devastating it must have been, and how thoughtless it was. Even and nothing should be of its time. Mm-hmm. Because as you said, humans, right? It's what was it, 78, right? I think it was 78, right? Yeah. Humans made that movie. Humans should have known better than to say, okay, our only Black character is this, pimp who, this is an obvious issue. You would think that someone, and this is why we need a diverse group of people in the room, whether they're writers, artists, boardroom executives, wherever it may be. You always need a person from every community. And I know that's a huge undertaking, because there are so many communities, but gosh darn it, it's so important, right? Yeah. Because then if somebody who was Black was in that room, they would say, you know what? I'm not so thrilled that the only character we have on screen interacting with Superman is a shucking and jiving pimp, right?
Yeah.
That's not good. And and whether it's 2021, 1978, wherever it may be on the timeline, we have to have people in the room, right?
And it's so interesting that you say that too, because then it comes down to, well, if we don't have the people in the room right now, who's going to speak for the people that aren't in the room, right? And and that responsibility, that burden can often feel overwhelming, but at the same time, it's necessary. And so I tend to, again, I grew up at a time, where I watch James Bond movies, right? And, I never questioned the fact that I was rarely seeing strong female characters, let alone strong queer characters, let alone strong transgender characters. I grew up in a pop culture that was dominated by white heterosexual masculinity. And at times it's still the default in my thinking. If I'm writing a story, if I'm working on a project, I can't tell you how many projects I have where as I'm putting them together, I'll be like, oh, wait a sec, there's no women here, right? And how do I work women in? Oh, there's no queer folks here. How do I work queer folks in? And so it's up to each of us as creators and as human beings to hold it down for anyone who's not in the room. And then do your best to try to get people into the room, and knowing that it ain't always that easy. And this is where that recognition of privilege has to come in. My friend Brian Bendis and I created a comic for DC, Naomi, and when we set out to create that comic and create that character, the first thing that we did was make this conscious decision to not have our lead character be a white teenage boy, because most superheroes start out as white teenage boys, right? And then it was, well, we don't even want our character to be a boy because there's enough of them, right? And then we had these discussions over, is it are we the ones to tell this story, or is it okay for us to tell this story? And the answer, I will always defend this, is like, no writer should be stuck writing just themselves and just what they know. Now, the responsibility is, because the rule they say is, as a writer, write what you know. That's the first rule. The second rule is learn what you write. And so if you're going to write, if you're a middle-aged man who's going to write a teenage girl, talk to some teenage girls, talk to parents who have teenage girls, get in there, understand what, some of the complexities of what you're writing, who you're writing, and then do the best job you can. And when opportunities come, to bring somebody in on a job, or an editor reaches out to you and says, hey, would you be interested in this project? No, I don't have the time right now, but I do know someone. And nothing infuriates me more. I'll tell you this, or there's a lot of things that infuriate me, right? But I have, in my career, I've been very honored, and I'm in a great position. And I can't tell you how many times I've recommended other people for jobs, and the response is, well, I've never heard of them, or, they haven't done enough work. And I remember when that was the excuse that was given for me not, getting jobs. And it's always funny to me, because when editors at Marvel or DC say this to you, right? It's like, look, man, we're talking about, nobody buys Batman because of who's writing Batman or who's drawing Batman. Yes, there's a certain amount of people that will follow a writer or an artist, but Batman comics sell no matter what, right? It doesn't matter if it's, even if the Batman fans are up in arms because suddenly there's a woman writing Batman, and how women can't write Batman. Shut up. You're going to buy that comic anyway, right? And you're going to, as long as Batman beats the shit out of the Joker and has some sort of weird, heteroerotic relationship with either Catwoman or Harley Quinn, you're happy. So don't give me none of that crap. The key is if you get to write Batman, maybe that puts you in a position that then you can write something that is more near and dear to your heart. But anybody can write any character. And I get so just aggravated. And it's interesting too, because I seriously am. I'm working on a project now. I don't even know what the project is yet, because I'm working on a character. And my idea for the character is, and it's inspired by people I've known. And it's a Black transgender woman. And it's the idea is that when this character was identified as male, they were like the most badass guy, you know, on the block, right? And now it's like 30, 40 years later, had surgery, they're a woman, but they're still completely badass, right? And so it's essentially like if John Wick, if we found out that John Wick had been a girl at one point, right? And I want to play with this, and this ideas in my head, this characters in my head, because I've known a character like this, right, in real life. And so I started reaching out to, the first thing I did is I started reaching out to all the transgender folks that I know. And I said, okay, this is what I'm doing. This is a story or a character that I'm building. I don't have the story yet. Character that I'm giving birth to, that I'm nurturing. And I said, and I'm going to ask you really stupid questions that I never would have asked in a million years. I'm going to ask you those annoying questions that make me sound like like somebody's, bordering on racist, transphobic, homophobic grandmother, right? Who says really inappropriate things. And I said, because there's things that I don't think about in terms of, like when the conversation is about gender neutral bathrooms, right? Well, I don't think about that because honestly, that doesn't affect me, right? But it does affect the people around me, and it's going to affect this character that I'm writing. So I need to understand all of the intricacies and the drama and the nuance of just deciding where you're going to go to take a piss, right? And if that means I have to ask you as my friend or as my colleague some really awkward questions to make my character more believable, great. Because as it makes my character more believable, it's also going to give me a better understanding into, your life or the life of at least one or two other people. It's I just think as a storyteller, I'm obligated to do that, right? As a storyteller, I'm obligated to get to the truth, to get to the heart of the matter, and the truth of our humanity is also, is influenced by our individual experiences and who we are.
That's that, and it's just that amazing lens that you have that allows you to understand how important it is that you bring that truth of others into your work. That, a lot of folks feel like, oh, I've been marginalized, I've had this experience, so I know what that experience is. But that is really different for all of us. To varying degrees and depending on who we are and depending on where we grow up. And, there are all these factors. So the fact that you go out and you find these friends of yours and these folks that can give you authentic ideas, authentic voices, authentic experiences, their stories, and then you bring that to the character, that's why I think that your work sings so loudly. But there's also, I want to really make it crystal that your work also has this incredible subtlety. I mean, a lot of it is broad, especially, the Power Man and Iron Fist.
Yeah.
There's a lot of it that's wonderful in your face, comic book theatrics, so to speak. But there's this subtlety to it, the relationships, the characters, and you don't say, this is a lesbian couple, but you see by their interaction, you see by their, their tenderness toward each other or their roughness with each other. Because it's not always tender. That's what the relationship is. And I think that that's why your work is so important, because it's not bang you over the head, knock you down. I'm going to show you, a gay character.
Yeah.
Here's someone who's transgender. Here is your black character, and that's the way they insert those in to check the boxes.
Yeah.
The network has that.
Yeah. And that drives me nuts. I just look, I know that I don't think like everybody all the time. The other day I was sitting around and I was, about 2 years ago, I went through a really bad breakup, like definitely the worst breakup I've ever had in terms of a relationship. And, 2 years later, I'm still like, I can't date anybody ever again. Right. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, yeah, I don't want to, whoever, if I get together with somebody next, like, is it possible just to have a relationship where it's like, there's no sex. You don't have to live together. You don't even necessarily have to be attracted to each other on a physical level. It's just like you just really like this person. You like hanging out with them, and they don't make you sick to your stomach when you eat in front of them, right? This sounds so shallow. Or like something out of Seinfeld years ago. This is probably 10, 15 years ago. I was on a date with this woman, and the way she ate was so repulsive, right? She chewed with her mouth open and she smacked. And it was like, yeah, it doesn't matter if she's willing to have sex with me. I can't eat. Like, this is disgusting, right? So I'm that sort of person where it's like, yeah, okay, like, do you repulse me? No? Okay, let's just hang out, And I was thinking about that as I was talking to a friend of mine about writing a character like that, who's just like, there's the Billy Wilder movie, Some Like It Hot, where the ending is Jack Lemmon, he's still dressed as a woman, and he's trying to explain to the guy who thinks he's a woman why they can't get married. And he finally pulls off his wig and he goes, "I'm a man." And the guy's like, "Yeah, so what?" And it's like,
work with that.
Yeah, we can work with that. And I was like, I'm becoming that old guy, right? I'm just like becoming that guy who's like, yeah, okay, you know what? You laughed at my jokes, and you're not an asshole. Let's just see how we make this work. And so I sometimes think about that, because I have had people point out to me that I'm not like, sometimes I don't think the same way. I had I'll never forget the first time I went on a date with another man that I didn't realize I was on a date until we were on it, right? I thought we were just, going out. It was just two guys hanging out for coffee, that sort of thing. And then it was like halfway through, it was like, oh, shit, this guy's he's asked me on a date. Like, this is, all right, well, let's just roll with it, And it was so funny because, I can't remember how I let him know that wasn't my preference, and he got pissed off, right? He was like, well, what are we doing here then? And I was like, oh, this is what all the women I know talk about. This is what they like. I'm like, well, we can be friends, can't we? And he's like, well, if there's no sex in it for me, I don't want to be your friend. And I was just like, huh. Well, that kind of sucks, because you seemed like a nice enough guy. We could have, hung out and done whatever, gone to see kung fu movies, but no, you had to ruin this by bringing the sex into it, right? So I just feel like that's a character. I want to see a character like myself in something that I write like that, where you're just at that point where it's like, yeah, look, oh, you're willing to drive to the movies? You'll pick me up and you'll pay for it? Okay. We're fine. No, we're not holding hands, because I don't do that with anybody. But yep, you're my boyfriend. Okay, yep, you can be my husband. That's fine, as long as boom, boom, boom. Like there's as long as I'm getting 98% of the things that I need, and the other 2%, yeah, I can live without the sex. That's fine. Let's just So I don't know how I'd make a story like that work. But I think it might be kind of funny to see it, or just kind of interesting, because again, I think that I think most of us have very complex relationships with people that if we tried to put them into a book or a comic or a film, like, some people just wouldn't get it, right? Because a lot of times our lives are far more complex than the way pop entertainment tries to simplify things, and they try to simplify things in ways that make you feel comfortable. And it shouldn't always be comfortable, it should be, sometimes life is complicated and messy and scary and terrifying. And, my goddaughter, who's like, God, she's pushing up on 30 now. But I remember when she was like 4 or 5 years old, my goddaughter is this little tiny white girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. And I would take her out and we'd go places. And it was like, I was always terrified that someone thought I kidnapped this kid, right? And whenever she would have to go to the bathroom, as 5, 6, 7-year-olds have to do, it's like, oh God, what, how do I take her to the bathroom? Like, I can't bring her into the men's room with me. I can't go into so, we'd be someplace and I'd be standing there, like, just looking for the most innocent looking person to ask, will you take my goddaughter into the bathroom, please? Right. Because, and it's like, how do I turn that into a story? How do I turn that into a scene? Because there are people who live that every day. Right. There's people who do not conform to what the norm is. What the hell's the norm? Who's to say? Right. So
these are wonderful. It reminds me, our son, blonde hair, blue eyed. My wife is Puerto Rican. And when he was being born, the midwife said, "Oh, I see the blonde hair peeking out." And we're like, "You're looking in the wrong place." As he was a baby, my wife would take him out. Everybody assumed she was the nanny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that experience is very, very relative. I cannot believe how quickly our Power Hour has gone. I do want to show folks some of your work. So can we do a quick, trip through some of the stuff that you've done so people can just see it? This is you doing Luke Cage and bringing him back to the forefront. I know that your friend who I'd love to talk to, Brian Bendis, brought him into the Avengers and kind of brought him into the modern era, which is wonderful. And then you continued it and made it really a powerful experience for so many folks.
This was, writing Luke Cage was a dream come true. It was a character I loved as a kid. And it's funny because Raza, who did the covers, I looked almost a little bit like that Luke, not as handsome or rugged, but this was a fun character to work on, and Brian Bendis, some of the things he did to evolve that character and grow that character is what made me love him even more. Making him a father, having him in a heated relationship with Jessica Jones, so that was always a fun one.
And then the incredible Sanford Green, who is one of my favorite. And this was such a fantastic book.
Yeah, this was, in terms of the work I did at Marvel, this was it. This was the closest thing to a perfect series for me. And it was, a lot of it was ideas I'd been kicking around as a kid, and it was really just getting into the ideas of friendship.
And then you got to do a little bit of Deadpool, which was also, I think it was with Power Man Iron Fist, right? It was a crossover, as you would say, right?
And that was so funny because I'd never read much Deadpool. It's like, oh God, crash course. And this is the one that everybody, the book that was canceled before it even came out. I remember issue 1 came out on a Wednesday, and that Monday they called me to say, "Oh yeah, we're canceling your title." It was supposed to be, they had committed to a minimum of 12 issues and they cut the last 6. So I had to go back and rewrite issue 5 and 6 to make the story come to an ending. And now I hear from almost more people than any about this title. This is everybody's favorite Marvel thing that I wrote. And it's like, well, nobody bought it.
Another great artist. I mean, did you get your choice of, because the artists you've worked with are so phenomenal.
I have never had, when I've been at Marvel and DC, there's only been like 2 times that anyone even remotely listened to me in terms of choice of artist. And it's nothing that anyone talks about. So yeah. And
this is, I guess you were building toward this, right? This is everything. And you brought Sanford Green along with you to do some of the artwork.
And it was actually Sanford who brought me along. Sanford and Chuck Brown had been developing this for quite some time, and it had fallen by the wayside. And then Sanford and I did Power Man and Iron Fist together. And when that book ended, he had an opportunity to try something new and different. And so he introduced me. Well, Chuck and I already knew each other, but he brought us together, and we did Bitter Root. And that's been a long, strange journey. It's a family. It's 3 men and a little baby is what it is. It's like me, Chuck, and Sanford fighting constantly over what this book should be. But it's fun. It's
interesting. I didn't know that Sanford was one that brought you in. That's fascinating to know.
Oh yeah, and I bullied my way into taking control, so that's
And you got
that's how it is.
Cyborg, but here, this is the book you were talking about before, Naomi,
Yeah.
which is such an important book, and now been picked up for a series, right?
Yeah, the pilot is in production right now, so I don't know if it's been picked up for series or not yet, but they're shooting the pilot. Ava DuVernay is producing it, and Casey, I can't think of Casey's last name, young woman out of New York, like 16, 17 years old, playing the lead, and just very exciting. It's like, this is the idea that there could be a superhero who looks like this, that was never a reality when I was a kid growing up. And when I see, cosplayers and all the excitement around this character, it's like, this is what it's all about. It's that when a kid sees themselves or someone who looks like someone they know, there's no better feeling.
And you'll definitely come back to the show when this comes out, and we'll talk some more about it. And then this, I just want to show this right quick. This is your wonderful piece on the Black Panther Party, and another great. And here's some pages from it, just right quick, so folks are getting a flavor of it. And all these books are available, I should say, and I'm sorry I haven't said it before, on our bookshop.org Power Hour author list, which our dedicated volunteer, Chris, who's always in the comment section, is going to give you a link, all you folks watching, to buy all of David's wonderful comics. And this is just a really a small example of all the great work you've done, and our conversation tonight, I hope, I know, inspired folks to go out and read some more of it. I know that tonight I want to pick up my Power Man Iron Fist and read it again, because I want to pick up all of your voice in it now that I've heard it and been able to experience this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. This was really fun.
I really appreciate you being with us, sharing these ideas. And I hope that, I don't know if we had the breakthrough we were hoping for at the outset, but I hope that this gave you just a small iota of what you give to all of us. And it's really a truth that you are that change maker that we talked about at the when I was introducing you. You are looking for this. You were thinking about the idea of you need diversity in characters, but then you realize you need diversity in creators, and then diversity in editors, and it goes all the way up in that chain. And you've done that, my friend, and thank you for that work.
Well, thank you. I will embrace that as best I can. Thank
you. We'll see you again soon. Be well.
Yep. Thank you.
So that is David F. Walker, everybody. As I said, Chris is giving you a link to buy his work at our bookshop.org list. And we love bookshop.org because they give back to independent bookstores in your area. We want to thank David F. Walker for being with us tonight. What a wonderful conversation. The very epitome of what the Power Hour should be, empowering and entertaining all at the same time. We want to thank you all for joining us for this conversation, for this virtual community building, because otherwise David and I are just shouting into the wind, and what does that accomplish? So thank you for being with us and sharing this communion tonight. It is incredibly special, and we thank you for being with us. We are here every weeknight, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Please do come back and join us again. We will be here for you. Please be here with us. Until soon, much love and respect. And please be good to each other. Be good to your families, chosen or otherwise. And most especially, as David, his own self, pointed out tonight, be good to yourselves. You need it, and we need you here with us.
We need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers.